professional callers. She'd spend her winters teaching fifth grade outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and her summers out west as a caller. um, I didn't do much dancing until after I got married, and we went to Morocco in 1967. My wife, as a teenager, was a competitive square dancing. I don't know if any of you even knew that that existed at one time, but apparently it was a thing. I've never seen it. When we were in Morocco, about 6 months after we started dancing, the caller left, and I said, well, I'll teach new classes so we can keep a group to dance. We'll dance to records, but I don't know. I'm not going to be a caller. When we left Morocco, I threw everything away and said, never again. We continued dancing, and in 72, we went to Naples, Italy. The club there did not have a caller. They had a bunch of records that they had all memorized. They fell in love with my collection of sets in order 33s that were really great because it was the best figures that a caller had developed over the years that they tend to put on them. And that's when I started calling in interest in, and I attended the caller schools up in Chiemsee, Germany. Tom Crisp and I'm drawing a blank as to who the other one was. You talk about dancing the female parts. That's one of the things we did. It was caller school during the day, and at night we had dances. Better than half of the crowd there were all callers or callers' wives, and so the front two squares always were clowning around, switching sex during the call, switching partners, etc., to see if we could mess up the callers. But, and then I went up to Iceland in 76 through 79. That's when I was able to afford to buy my first Hilton. And Iceland had a paid position in their government for their native dance. And she recognized the common threads with Western square dancing. And so she came down and took the lessons and went through the classes we had there. And she wanted us to go out in town and do some demos. And that's when I opened up my Hilton to set it up for 50 cycle. And I was impressed at the quality on the inside of a Hilton. And so when I got back to Naples, where I'd bought my house in 70, and I was getting ready to retire from the Navy, I wrote Jim a letter and says, hey, can you use an electronics tech that's also a caller? Well, they weren't going to let me escape. They really didn't need me at that point in time. I was the 13th employee. And it was in the transition time after Dick Henschel had bought it, but Jim and Dottie were still working full time as part of the deal to sell it. So I started at Hilton in 85, and about a year later, I became head of the technical department. I was a member of ECTA from, I think it was 73 that I joined. It might have been 74 or up through 79. ECTA is the European Callers and Teachers Association. And since I was calling down in Italy, nobody knew me. So in order to get in, I had to get up early one Sunday morning, get down there for the meeting where they made me call for a square of other callers just to see if they were going to accept me as a member. So I also was a member of Color Lab until I no longer could technically qualify with the number of dances I was doing a year. But anyway, that's who I am. Looking at my list, one thing I don't know if you know, the old equipment owner's manuals and the schematics are available on Hilton, Texas website. I was going to put down what the links are, but it's under, I think, support and old equipment, but the schematics and so forth are there now of all of the older equipment, but that does not include the MA150 or the MA220. The main reason on that is the industry has paid me the utmost, can't think of it, can't think of the term I need, but we know of two companies that have tried to reverse engineer the preamp of the MA150 and 220. So that's why the schematics are not normally available for those. One of the questions that was sent is maintenance for longer life. Now, one of the things there, don't keep your sets in the car if you're only using them once a week. The vibration and the temperature changes on the inside of the car are not conducive for long life. Now, we drove our suppliers nuts because we said, okay, we have customers in Alaska that keep the equipment in the trunk, and we also have callers in Saudi Arabia that keep their equipment in the trunk, so that the parts that we were buying all had to have a wide range of static temperature for when they're not in use. When I was in Iceland, the last thing that went into the car was my set, and it went into the passenger compartment, and it was the first thing out at the dance. Because you don't want to let your sets get cold, take it inside and let the moisture condense on it. For normal maintenance on the turntables, you should clean and adjust the drive wheel and the bottom of the platter regularly. If you're calling several, I don't think there's anybody left that's calling several dances a week that still use a turntable. But if you do, you should clean it about every 3 months. If you're only doing one dance a week, every 6 months to a year, you should go through and clean it, lubricate, and adjust. Lubrication of the turntable is 1 or 2 drops of oil, not a squirt. Or if you can get a white lithium grease, something like that, why, a little bit, but you don't want enough to get back out on the bottom of the turntable. Now, for all of the sets, there are a lot of controls on sets that don't tend to get used. Occasionally, every 6 months to a year, you should run them all up and down a few times. If they sit in one place all the time, they tend to get dirty. If a control starts to get noisy when you're turning it, you need to open the setup and clean it with a spray contact cleaner. You cannot clean it from the outside. Lots of people have tried. It's like taking a shower with a raincoat and rain hat on. You're not getting what needs to be cleaned. Now, a lot of the newer sets have auxiliary inputs and output controls. If you're not using it, turn it down. Don't leave it up. Uh, I've had a lot of phone calls with people that have a weird squealing problem, and it's because they have their auxiliary inputs and outputs both turned up. The auxiliary input control has gotten noisy, and so it's gone up to where it's fully turned up, even if it's sitting close to the off position, and it's picking up an electronic feedback. So if you ever have a problem with one of the newer sets that has the auxiliary inputs and outputs, again, running the controls up and down occasionally if you don't use them helps, and turn them down if you're not using them. PDD. I think that's what I've got there. Believe it or not, as somebody asked about changing Cinch Jones to quarter-inch jacks. If you think of a quarter-inch plug, think large to large and small to small. On the Cinch Jones connectors, one of the connectors is wider than the other. That wide one is ground. It goes with a plug that the plug has a tip and a sleeve, and the sleeve is ground, the tip is hot. Inside the set, the blue wire is the hot wire, and the brown wire is ground. Do not, because the quarter-inch jacks use a smaller hole than the Cinch Jones, a lot of people have tried to use washers. Don't, because if it ever loosens up, and with the vibration and transport, they tend to loosen up, the jack can shift around and short out and cause a problem. Laptop connections for different models. The 300 has a tape input jack back by the top, on the top, back by the toner arm. All the 300 families, even the 300As and Bs, have a RCA jack on the front that can be used for playback. I do not. I like the results better going in back by the back of the tone arm. It gives better music and better gain. For 75A, the 75A and B, there's an RCA jack on the back labeled monitor music. That's directly across the tone arm, and that's the place to play back through. Now, most of the C models, well, have auxiliary inputs. The 300C does not, but the newer cartridges have a lot lower output than the old 89T needle. So if you're playing back, and you may need what we call an inline booster, something to give a higher gain signal. Now, I need to talk about something more information that you might not need to know, talking about Series 2 sets as non-Series 2 sets. A Series 2 set, which includes 300As, 300Bs, later 300s, and some modified 300s, and the 75A and B, have a tone compensating volume control. if you turn the volume control up above about 10 o'clock, with off being 6 o'clock, if you turn the volume control up above 10 o'clock, the amount of bass and treble boost will start to roll off. So if you're playing back and have to turn your volume way up to 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, it won't sound the same as it does at lower volume. Now on a 300, you can turn it to increase, and that should allow you to keep the volume control, the Series 2 volume controls down lower, or get a booster. If you connect a computer to your set and you have a hum, one of the first things you want to try is unplug your AC and run your computer on a battery. Does the hum go away? If it does, this is the answer to the problem. In the US, it's a 2 to 3 prong connection. That hum is creeping in there on what in the industry we call ground loop. Your computer is grounded to the power supply, to the power source. Your set is grounded to the power source, and the shielded cable that you're connecting the computer to the set with has a ground connection. That makes a loop through ground. Theoretically, it won't mean anything, but wire does have resistance, and so the hum just runs around that loop and causes problems. But the easiest way to do it is to use a connector where your computer is not directly connected to ground. It can pick up its ground from the shielded cable that you're using to the set. Oh. Are there any questions up to this point on things that I've covered?
I get hum, so I'll try that.
I have a Hilton 100.
Okay.
What specifically of what you were mentioning of the 75s and the 300s is different on it? Or is it pretty much the same type of thing on the AC, the RCA jacks and stuff?
Same thing on the RCA jacks, I think. Now, does the M100, now we've got a problem. Some of these equipments I have not seen for quite a while. Does the M100 have auxiliary inputs on the front?
I think so. It's in Texas and I'm in Oregon right now,
Yeah,
so I'm not
yeah.
sure.
If it's got because the 75C has auxiliary inputs on the front, so I'm pretty sure the M100 does too.
Okay.
So you'd use the auxiliary input on the front on that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions at this point?
On the 75B, you were talking about the music monitor in the back. That would be your input if you were gonna you plug your music source in there if you were gonna off the computer.
Yeah, it's the jack that is closest to the outside. It's labeled monitor music on the 75, 75A, and 75B. That is right across the tone arm. Now, if you've got a computer plugged in, you're going to have to unplug it if you're going to play a record, because the computer will load the input down.
Okay.
And okay.
Dick, just
Yes.
there's the back of the 100 for your previous question.
Yep. That and see, there is no, the monitor music jack would be here. And notice it's not. You have the high and low outputs on the 75A and B. I think they're labeled tape recorder and mic, but I'm not sure on that offhand. But yeah, on the 100, you would want to use the auxiliary music input. And these are the two controls that I'm saying, if you're not using them, turn them down, but you should run them up and down a few times a year just to keep them clean. Thank you, whoever's got all those pictures. I was trying to get them together and I never was able to. Needles. The 89 T needles used on all of the non-C sets of the 75 and 300 families are getting hard to find and frightfully expensive. They're running in the $40 to $50 range. I even found one online for $240. I was thinking that was a misprint and he meant 24. Oh, that's interesting. Somebody notice this picture here. This is the 75A that has been modified to take the newer style needle. And that's something I can do. It would probably end up costing about $200 plus whatever else the set needs to overhaul.
Yeah.
But that
just a note, Dick. In Australia as well, there are people that actually work on the turntables. What you did back, you can supply that, and it will go over, and it can all be done here rather than the cost of shipping the turntable and everything back to you.
Yeah, but the modifications now, a 75B has an unused, as I said earlier, the newer needle. The output of the newer needle is about 1/10 of the output of the 89T. And so the 75Bs have an extra stage that can be modified and put into operation to give the times 10 multiplier that's needed. On the 75A, we have to crank the gain up to maximum, which we originally did with the original 300 when we were trying to modify it, but then we decided we had to add an extra stage to it. Somebody asked a question about microphone cord care and maintenance. I can't think of much there, except as with all plugs and connectors, don't bend them at right angles. If you keep your microphone plugged into the remote cord, it's probably worth at least annually getting a pipe cleaner and some alcohol and running it up and down at the inside of the connector on the remote cord to clean the connections. Plugging and unplugging connections internally and externally is a good idea every once in a while to help clean the connectors. That's one of the things I do on all the sets when I'm going through and overhauling them. I will unplug and plug all of the connectors a few times to help clean them. Oh. As a general information, if any of you have yak stacks made by Palomino around 2015, when Palomino took over and manufactured the yaks, they did a national square dance in Texas, and they complained about sets overheating.
That's you, Scotty.
So they sent one of their yaks to Hilton. I, at that point in time, had built a impedance measurer where I could vary the frequency of the input and measure what the impedance of the speaker was at specific frequencies. And the original yaks, the speaker coils were custom wound for yak, because there's no way you can take 3 speakers and come up with an 8 ohms load. They had done a weird job of speakers that comes close, except that with 3 speakers mounted inside a cabinet, there are frequencies that the speakers all resonate and the impedance will drop. There are several frequencies on those where a full yak, the impedance will drop below 4 ohms. If you're trying to use the 220, because the 220 is a totally different type of power amplifier and it's well protected, so it cannot draw too much current, and people complain about it cutting out syllables. And that's because at a specific frequency, the impedance drops below 4 ohms. The cure for that is get a hold of a Series Y so you increase the speaker impedance. Excuse me. I've had this horrible chest cold and cough for close to a month now. And somebody was asking about Series Ys.
Hey, Dick. Do have a question that popped up in the chat. They wanted to ask about fuses.
Okay. What about the fuse? Where is the question? Where are they? And if you could put that picture up that shows the back of the M100 again. Now, one of the first things I did when I went to Hilton, I convinced them they needed to start making all of the sets so that they would work on 110 or 220 or 240. Up to that point, a 220 set had to be specifically built from scratch, and there was no, and they were 110 220s. But when can we make just the bottom show? But yeah, it says right here the fuse holder. This is a rectangular compartment here. There's a dot that shows what the voltage setting is set for. On the older versions, this whole rectangular area pops out, and the fuse holder is available there. There's a two-sided fuse holder, a U.S. fuse holder size that takes a 3 Alpha Golf 3AG size fuse. But there's also holders on the other side that take the European fuses. Now, when you're set at 220 volts, you need to fuse it at half the amperage that you'd fuse it for 110. Also, in the European electrical system, both sides of they do not have a hot and a neutral, as we do here in the States, so that for a European type set, and I assume Australian is the same way, you need to fuse both sides of the line. But the fuse is behind here. If you have any questions about what size for what set, send me an email. I can look it up.
Yeah, that was the rest of their question. They wanted to know where to buy them and what kind.
Yeah, not knowing anything about Australia, and I can't even. I can look up what the U.S. designation of the fuse type is, but if you know, I do not go to an automotive store to buy the fuses, because the automotive stores are not going to have a fair variety of U.S. size fuses.
Okay. Yeah, the person that did ask that was from Northern California. And then we have another question. They say they have an MA150. Can you connect more than 2 computers into it with a Y connector?
No, because the output circuit of one of the computers will load down the output of the other, and you probably need to build a box with a switch that would switch back and forth between the two. Would be the easiest way to do it.
That's the way they actually do the setups at some of the conferences and whatnot that you have here. Is they run through a control panel, which is a switch, so you can plug 3 or 4 computers in, but it's a turned off computer 1, computer 2, computer 3, so you only have a single output into the system.
Right. Yes, because the output circuitry of one computer is just going to load down the output circuit of another.
Yeah.
Under common problems and fixes, I've already talked about the squeal you get with the auxiliary controls go bad, go noisy. I talked about if you have a 220 and it tends to cut syllables out, that's a speaker impedance problem. And if your controls get noisy, you need to run unused controls up and down. Just running them up and down a bunch of times will sometimes clean them off themselves. If you have problems at a dance, one of the things you want to do when you get home is set up your equipment at home and see if the problem is still there. Sometimes we make mistakes at dances on something stupid, like plugging things into the wrong hole, and we don't catch it. When I was setting up for a major convention up in Reno, the halls had really bad echo problems. We ran 4 full yaks, and I was having problems with the Series Y connection. I couldn't get one speaker working. I ended up throwing the connector across the room, only later to discover there was nothing wrong with that. It was the way I was connecting it. So it's always best to try and see if you can reproduce the problem at home. Now we talked some about Series Ys. Hilton, Texas apparently is not sending Series Ys out with their sets. And Hilton sets are designed to work with a speaker load between 4 to 16 ohms. If the speaker load drops below 4 ohms, you're going to have problems. With all of the older non 220 sets, the problem will first show up as heating problems. In a long time, it is stressing the power output. Well, there's a picture of the old Hilton Series Y. The ones Hilton is making now, they use a box to mount the jacks in. Steve, talking to Hilton, Texas on that, there's a box with about 50 of the old Series Y connectors in it. They can't find them. When Paul started the divorce process, he moved everything to Texas, and then they got it back. But they haven't gone through and sorted through the entire container worth of boxes of stuff. Steve is going to build up some more Series Ys. And I don't know whether I need to talk much about speaker impedance problems, but if you're trying to use 2 4 ohm speakers with a Hilton, you have to use a Series Y. And one of the things when you're using a Series Y, you do not want to plug the male plug of a Series Y into the back of one speaker and then run another cord over to a second speaker. If you do that, those 2 speakers will be 180 out of phase with each other. The Series Y should always be connected toward the set, and 2 cords run out to the speakers.
Dick,
Yo,
maybe if they find those Series Ys that are missing, they'll come across your spring
well, that
to make the feet.
well, the problem is I don't have the springs, so I can't.
But the equipment went to them, and they never found it, right?
Yeah, and also Paul sent me all of the almost all of the miscellaneous parts. He ended up sending back to me with a deal that as I sell them, they get 50% of what I charge for them. I haven't written them a check for last year's stuff, but so when it comes to parts for old equipment, they don't have it. I've got the best supply of unique parts for the old equipment. I had to add a whole new storage shed out in my backyard to put it in. power cords for the old 300s and the 75A. Those are the oval shaped cords with 3 round connectors on the inside. Those were the business machine standard cords of the 50s and 60s. They are no longer available. And one of the problems is there was no industry standard for which side of the line was hot and which side of the line was neutral. Hewlett Packard and one of the main manufacturers of test equipment, electronic test equipment, the cord, the hot side and the neutral side of the cord are backwards from what they should be. So when I found a supply of the cords, I always had to check them. And in a lot of cases, I had to cut the male plug off and replace it with the male plug to get the hot and the neutral sides on the right one. If you ever are calling a dance outside and hanging onto the microphone gives you a little bit of a tinkle, then you've got the hot and neutral reversed. But I do have some of the power cords. Unfortunately, I have to charge too much for them because I had to pay more than I wanted to, but I have some. If you have the ability, I suggest you change out the power receptacle for one of the modern computer type receptacles. With a 75A, it's just a matter of cutting out a little bit of sheet metal. With a 300, there's 2 layers of sheet metal that have to be cut. So it makes it a little difficult. One other thing that you may or may not know, Hilton Concord serial numbers start with the month and year of manufacture, and then there's a sequential number after.
Dick?
Yes.
Mel Wilkerson has his hand raised. He'd like to ask a question.
Okay, Mel.
Yeah, a while back, because I was working my Hilton through a transformer, which was a big mistake here because the cycles are different in Australia than they are in Germany and in North America. I ended up having to purchase one that was compatible, and I bought one from Sweden. So I bought myself a nice 75. One of the issues that I ran into was getting bits and pieces and parts and sending for repair was proof of purchase, sending back something not brand new. I know when I sent stuff back to the States to get the conversion thing for my stuff over here in Australia, I had to actually prove that this was, I owned the system and I didn't keep the receipt from 20 years ago. So it required statutory declarations. And if I remember correctly, on your website, you still have that issue with some of the stuff. Is that correct?
Yes, but a lot of it comes. I have had problems with a Canadian sending me a set for repair, and one of the statements is country of origin, and he put Canada. Well, no, it was U.S. It was built in the U.S. When it asked for country of origin, where was it built?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about Australian customs, but with Canadian customs, the easiest way is to get a statement, and I don't know if they have a special form that can be filled out by them before they send it to me that proves that it's theirs. So when it comes back, they don't have to pay the import on anything. They still have to, of course, have to pay for import on the repairs.
There are statutory declarations that they can fill out on that, but it has to come back with the system.
Yeah. But it's a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
The reason I mention it is repair of some systems not so much in the US, but abroad when I was in Canada or over here or in Europe, when they're sent back, where the system is made goes on the label, but it's being shipped back and forth, it comes back. And if you don't include that and your proof of ownership that it is being sent for repair and that comes back with it, you end up getting charged a fortune, or it gets turned around and sent back to you to get the proper paperwork, and it may not even be received. And
Right.
I'm quite sure, Dick, you don't want to have like a $2,000 or $3,000 bill for shipping and handling and sales of a new piece of equipment when you're just repairing a tone arm or something.
Yeah. Now, yeah. And what I had to do with that case, and I now state on the shipping form, if I am charged import duty, I will try to correct the problem, but you will be charged for that. And if I can get it back, I'll go ahead and reimburse you minus my time to get it back. The one that I fought, I ended up having 7 hours dedicated to try to get it back, and I couldn't get more than half of it back. So it's not worth my getting involved in fighting it. So if you have to send something to me, the crossing country borders, be very careful on your end that all the paperwork is filled out. Now, I have not had to go any back and forth to Australia. I have shipped several things to Germany and to Canada. And if you dot the I's and cross the T's, it's just a bit of a hassle. If you don't, it ends up costing a fair significant amount of money. Any other questions?
I don't know, this kind of, I don't use, by myself, I don't use Hilton equipment. Mel, am I still doing feedback? Or did I get it fixed?
Don't hear feedback.
Okay.
I can hear a little.
I hear a little bit, but not like it was.
Okay, there I'm down lower. Can I still be heard?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna share a screen real quick. This has got to do with hooking two computers up to a Hilton. And so this is what I do, but I don't use Hilton equipment. I use a couple column speakers. Let's see if I can find where to go. Oh, it's showing me everything but that. Hold on a second. It's a 4-way splitter. Okay, now let me try this again. Share screen. There we go. They call it passive or something, but this is what I use. And you can either go 4 in and 1 out, or 1 in through the out to 4 different ones. It'll work either way. And I run this from the out. From the out, I run that to my speaker, and my laptop plugs into one of these. And then when there's other callers there, they plug into the other ones. And we just turn the volume down on whoever's not being used. And the first thing I noticed when I got it, the first time we tried using it, we were getting some, when we had the 2 computers in, we were getting ground noise. Now I can't, oh, that didn't work. How do I get to the other tab with this? Oh no, that really did it. Okay, let me switch that back. The zoom bar is in the way of me doing anything up there. Okay, back here, share screen, this one, and I got one of these ground loop noise isolators and I run that in between the speaker and the output to that little box. So would that solve the problem on the Hilton, is basically what I was asking?
Uh, yeah, or as I said earlier, the little 2 to 3 prong ground connectors. Well, you need to break the grounds. Now, if you're connecting 2 computers into that box and then into the set, you'd have to break the ground on both computers. But those ground loop of that breaking things that you showed for $9, they're well worth doing. Now, somebody mentioned 50, 60 cycle speed controls.
Yeah, that was me.
That's something, if you're mechanically able, you can talk to me. I won't take the time to do it. Well, finally, I don't have a good graphics program on this laptop. I'm trying to bring up a picture and it's taking forever to bring it up. Come on. But okay. Let's do it. Do you see?
No.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Here is the inside of a 300. Now, all of the speed controls on all of the Hilton sets are similar, but not exactly the same. But right here is the main speed control. Now, that's so big it's blurry. There are 2 screws here, and if you loosen those 2 screws, the speed control can be moved without moving the motor. And you can adjust it so that the difference for 50, 60 cycle can be set up. Now, thank goodness, when I first did it myself in Iceland, I could go down to the powerhouse and get a 60 cycle source to run a strobe lamp and a 50 cycle source to run the motor, so that I could use a 60 cycle strobe disc to set the speed, so that the speed control would read 45 when it was running on 50 cycles. Now, I assume that those of you running on 50 cycles, you can find strobe discs for 50 cycles. And the trick is you set the motor to where it strobes correctly at the correct speed. And then I have a piece of plastic that I've cut that I jam in between the motor slide plate. That's this and the top of the set. And I can do that from the top with the platter off. And I jam that in place so that the motor can't move. And then I come down here and I loosen these 2 screws and move the speed indicator to 45. and retighten them.
When I had that issue with mine, which was a 300, I also got a disc that goes on the bottom of the platter, so that on the 300 you had that reflective mirror that would go up,
Right.
and they set that there so you could actually see it, and it would
Yep.
change. So you knew when you were at 45, you're at 45, and I always called it about 43 anyway. So I could set it to where I wanted, and it would adapt the
Yeah.
cycles that way as well, just as a confirmation. So
Yeah.
it can be done. It's just don't continually do it without doing it, because the turntable will work, but it will wear out very quickly, as I found out with my Milwaukee power tool set.
Well, yeah. Also, there are 3 different motors that have been used over the life of the 300. This one, this part of it, notice it all looks like one tin can. That is a Bristol motor that was only used in the very early 300s. Normally, this bigger diameter section will look like a piece of cast metal with a piece of sheet metal bolted up to it. That's either a Hurst or a North American Phillips motor. And there are differences in motor speeds between the Bristol and the NAP motor. I was just working on the phone back and forth over several weeks with a person trying to get an old 200 that somebody had put a newer motor in, and he couldn't get the speed set up because of the difference in speed of the motors. So anyway, and my email is Hilton Repair with no spaces at Comcast.net. I put it up in the early things, and I'll answer questions and so forth as I can. What happened with Hilton, the building we were in and got sold, and the new owner wanted the entire building, and Dick did a mathematical analysis and said there's no way that Hilton Audio would survive moving to a new building financially. Unfortunately, the decision was made that he was going to close Hilton while I was at my doctor's getting cast in concrete the date to have my left knee replaced. But it's a good thing that Hilton did close when it did, because that gave us the time for Paul to come forward and offer to buy the manufacturing end of it. And I said, okay, I'll maintain the stuff out of my own house. I went back down to work before I should have been going down, and to pack the stuff up to ship down to Texas. And I siphoned off inventory to pay myself for the time of helping to pack, to start the inventory for doing my maintenance business for my house. So but yeah, also my website is hiltonrepair.com. Any other questions?
I've posted your contact details in the chat, as
That,
well as the link to the repair if they want to send you a message and whatnot about what the problem is prior to shipping and all that other stuff. So good links to have, just copy on a Word document and keep it handy if you do need to get a hold of Dick. So all that's in the chat. And I believe Mark has put down, you've uploaded a bunch of the documents which are for the various Hilton systems as well. So those are the main documents that you can look through as references.
Do you repair the speakers as well? Like the LV?
no. No, I do not have any replacement speakers available. I can't afford to have the inventory. As a matter of fact, my home repair business grossed $6,000 last year. By the time I pay all of the shipping and licensing, etc., it doesn't even pay for beer money. So,
Yeah, well, as I understand it, Chris said he'd buy you beer all the time if he comes out to visit. Isn't that right, Chris? Chris is ignoring me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the other problems is my tax accountant retired this year, and my new tax accountant is going to charge me about $400 more than the old one was. Of course, my old one couldn't sell his business because he was charging his customers too little, that no company was going to take it over his old customer base, because they were going to have to raise the amount of money they were charging to do the taxes. So,
I have a question or kind of a combination question idea for non-Hilton equipment, because a lot of people these days are using like powered PA system speakers and some random mixer, because you can get some little mixer for $40 or something. And one of the components, if you're wanting to put a system like that together, is that of course they don't have a thumb wheel volume control for the music. And it seems to me like somebody could make a little thumb wheel gizmo that you could mount on. The problem with the mounting is because if you're just using plain old microphone with an XLR or whatever, you don't have a standard handle size to mount anything on. But you can have some kind of a little thing that would just be a little little thumb wheel pot, and just use and what you could do is you could run the music input from your computer into a little tiny box, tiny box, with another 8 standard mini connector output, and you could have a little remote control pot, and so you're not controlling the amp output, you're just controlling the music level. And you could plug that into any kind of system. And I wonder if anybody would ever make a thing like that. You know what I'm saying?
there have been some that have tried. What some of the problems, in order to do it passively, you would want to set it up so that a 20K controller would work as the remote resistor, because that's what all Hilton cords have. There is not a good way to do it with a passive device. You'd have to have an active device, and the Hilton sets, it adjusts the gain of the stage that is controlled is how it works inside of Hilton's. And to do it passively, you would lose a fair amount of the volume. It has been done. I am not interested in trying it. Now, talking about, let's take a couple minutes and talking about the non-Hilton equipment to get good sound. Basically, every time the National Square Dance has tried to use commercial sound equipment, it has caused major problems because commercial sound equipment is not the primary thing behind it, is not understandability of the human voice. So if you are buying a commercial mixer, the first requirement is it has to have independent tone controls for the music and the microphone. Hopefully, it'll be a minimum of a 3-band tone control. And if you're using commercial equipment, you want to increase the music bass and treble and decrease the mid-range, because that's where most of the sibilance and understanding of the human voice frequency ranges reside, is in the mid-range. The Hilton equipment, the music channel is set up and it suppresses the mid-range and boosts the bass and the treble. On the microphone, again, for clarity, the bass is greatly reduced. If you take a Hilton tone control, turn it to full bass, that's pretty close to flat response. So if you're dealing with commercial equipment, you want to reduce the bass in the microphone area, particularly for the men there. For the ladies, it's probably not that important unless they have a low voice to begin with. But the ability to have independent tone controls for the music and the microphone is critical.
Anytime I go out and do a party gig where there might be other performers on the stage, and there's a huge range of who might be up there and how sophisticated their sound is, and no matter what's there, no matter how fancy their equipment is, everybody, when it comes to making announcements and those kind of things, everybody wants to use my Hilton. It always sounds, it's always a million times clearer than anything else anybody ever has set up ever for in terms of voice for making announcements and things like that.
Yeah, and that's, in high school, I was head of the sound crew. And I love to turn the bass up on the voice because that sounds good, but it doesn't help the understandability. And with square dancing, you have to clearly hear the caller. It doesn't have to sound good. It has to be understandable. And, I get a kick out of the change as I became a caller, and I realized the difference than when I was running sound for my school district. I got hired by the Audubon Society for their monthly shows where they brought in professionals and so forth, and I'd run sound for them, and boy, they'd sound good to me as a teenager. But of course, as I got older and have lost my high frequency hearing, having a lot of bass in a voice doesn't no longer does the trick for understandability.
I wanted to throw in something that I don't know if you said this at the very beginning or not, but um, uh, when I'm calling with other callers, a lot of times somebody will plug in. This is on like an MA 150 or 220, and they'll plug in their computer, and you'll get some god awful hum and horrible noise, and just completely unacceptable terrible noise going on. And the first thing to try, which for some reason people are very reluctant about, is just swap out that audio input cable. You can get a big package of them for super cheap on Amazon or anything. And so I carry a whole bunch of them around with me. The first sign of trouble, I just like yank that thing out of there, plug in a new cable, and 9 times out of 10 that solves the problem, because it says just your audio input from your laptop over to the amplifier, that cable that fails. Those things are flaky and they fail a lot, and people for some reason they just don't want to believe that's what's oh no, it can't be that, it's got to be some complicated thing. I'm like, here, just plug a damn new cable in, it's that problem fixed. So I thought I'd just pass that little tidbit along. Bring yourself a bunch of extra cables and be generous with them.
Yeah, you need the ground connection between your music source and the um, amplifier. Unfortunately, most of the cables today, they are not truly shielded cables. A good audio cable should be a coaxial cable. It should have an outside braid for the ground all the way through the length, so that hum can't get into the inner wires of the cables. And as I discussed earlier, with the first one of the early things is, if you have that hum problem, run the computer on a battery. If it goes away, then get a 2 to 3 prong adapter that'll get rid of the ground plug for the computer.
Yeah, one thing on, when you're talking about the ground hum and the connection plug that you have, the 2 prongs going into the 3 prong adapter, so you eliminate the grounding. One of the things that I was told is if you're going to use one of those, run your power into a power bar with a surge protector and put the 2-point into that, because if you do have a surge, that's what your ground is for. At least that way the power bar is surge protected and it's not going to affect your Hilton without a ground on it.
Well, but yeah, if you have a good cable between the two, the ground can be carried through the cable connecting the audio from the computer to the amplifier.
Yeah, I was speaking more of the power from the wall to the amplifier.
Yeah. Also running all the equipment off of the same power strip will also help reduce the problem. But say plugging your computer directly into the wall, to one wall outlet, and the amplifier, if it's a built-in amplifier and it's plugged into another source, that's a possible problem right there too.
Are there any more questions for Dick?
not thinking of any, but he's covered quite a lot. It's been really interesting. Thank you, Dick.
Yep, yep. And like I said, I don't mind answering emails. They and even phone calls. Just remember the phone number that's listed on my website is my home phone, and please correct for the time differences. Particularly if you're calling from Australia, but email's a lot cheaper. But I do not appreciate getting calls since I am no longer working. I do not appreciate getting customers calling me at 7 a.m.
I'm assuming that's 7 a.m. your time.
Yes, yes, yes. You know, there are too many people on the East Coast of the United States that don't realize that, hey, I'm 3 hours behind you.
Hey Dick, I live in the Midwest, and I have to remind myself that you guys are 2 hours in the other direction from me.
Yep, yep.
Wake up, it's broken.
Thank you, Dick.
Yeah, no problem. And as long as I'm still kicking, I will be around to try and help anybody that needs it.
Well, Dick, thank you for coming.
Yep.
This wasn't as hard as you thought it was going to be, was it?
Well, I was going to try to get pictures of all of the sets and so forth, and I realized I don't have all that information. Yeah. And though one of the things I didn't mention, if you're looking for parts inside of a set, I need to know the serial number, then sometimes even more, because even within the model life of the sets, there were many changes that were made. You don't see anything on the outside. You know, it looks like exactly the same set, and they're totally different. The 75A and 75B look an awful lot alike, but the electronics inside of them are 3 generations different as far as the electronics on the inside. And so there's a number of minor changes, and not all of them were recorded. When I went to work for Hilton, that was one of my biggest complaints, is they didn't have any records except in the serial number book, where they kept track of the serial number and who bought what serial number. There were marginal notations on a lot of the major changes, but they didn't have a combined list. And so I made one up, but there are still changes that we don't know exactly what serial numbers were before and what were after that change.
Oh, so every once in a while you open one up and you say, "Oh, that's different."
Yeah. Well, some of them, I'll have records that serial number such and such has this change, and this one does not have the change. And there were 100 sets in between them, but exactly when that change occurred, I don't know. But to give you some idea, of course, you probably can't even see it. This is the listing of changes made. It's a two-page listing of all the changes by serial number, but they did not have anything like that when I first went there. And Uh,
Okay, so I'm gonna say that the Zoom meeting is officially over. So if anybody's wanting to take off because they got other things to do, you can, and we'll open it up for general discussion.
Thanks for putting it together, Mark. I really appreciate it. It was really entertaining and
Thanks
really
for coming up with
knowledgeable.
the idea.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
Everybody give Stephen a good hand there for coming up with a good idea for a meeting.
And
Well,
thank you much
hey,
as well, Dick. Much appreciated and good seeing you again.
Appreciate
It has
it,
been a
Dick.
very,
Thanks a
very
lot.
long time.
yeah, good stuff, Dick.
yep.
So now that we're open for general discussion, you can ask all the questions to Dick that don't relate to Hilton that you want to know.
I'm going to head out and say my goodbyes to everybody. So it was nice seeing you all again, Holly, Dick. Really good seeing
Good
you
to
guys
see you,
again.
Mel.
Bye, Hannah. Laura.
Yeah, good to have you,
All
Mel.
right, take her easy there, Mel.
Take care, Mel.
Bye, all.
Yeah,
Thank you
bye
all
now.
very much.
Take
In
care.
the earlier discussion, we were talking about the having to teach 2 classes a year to keep a club going. When I was in Iceland, 1 June, I had 12 squares on the floor. Come September, we had about 2.5, maybe 3 squares if everybody showed up. So with the military turnover, everybody with a family tended to transfer during the summer, and you had to teach 2 classes a year in order to keep the club going, which meant you pretty well stayed at mainstream with a few experimentals here and there. But to keep the older dancers challenged, you had to figure out new ways to use movements that they already know.
Yeah, I had the same trouble there when I was working overseas there myself, especially come around the June, July area. You just get a group graduated and dancing smoothly. And then that's when June, July was when all the transfers came for the oil companies and any of the American companies. Everybody was transferred out or moved around. And then you had a whole new batch of people to come in. And so you started again. And like Dick says, you get to mainstream and that's pretty much where you were.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first came back to the States, I was going to recruiting school. The Navy wanted to make me a Navy recruiter, which I did not want at all. But when I was going to recruiter school in Florida, I went out to a dance, and the caller knew that I was a caller and asked me to call a guest tip. Well, I called the second tip, and the floor was breaking down. This was a plus level club, and they were breaking down. And I'm calling mainstream. I even dropped it down to basic 50, and they were still having problems. But if I had been there through the entire dance, I probably would have caught on. If you called swing through, you better follow it with boys run, because that's the only way they knew it. you know, and it just totally floored me. I had dancers that came back to the States and danced with plus level clubs, and when they come back, they'd say, "Well, we danced with the plus level clubs, and there were some calls that we didn't know, but we never broke the set down." And that all came from the fact of getting them used to the idea of paying attention to those around them and learning the basics thoroughly. So many of the callers, it's easier to teach a new movement to keep the dancers interesting than figure out new ways to use old movements.
Yep.
Anyway, I have a celebration downtown. The first one was at 5 o'clock, and the second one's at 6. So I am going to say good night to all, or good morning to some of you, and take off. And I will be here. Email me. I may not get back to you immediately, but I will get back to you.
Thanks again, Dick.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dick. Appreciate it. Well done. Oh, bloody clock.
Scotty, beat me up.
Hey, Stephen, what
Yeah.
night does Daryl do his club?
His club night is Friday night. The lessons are Sunday.
Oh, okay, Friday night club.
Yeah, so the lessons will be tomorrow.
Okay. Because when I come to Canada, I'm thinking of calling into Portland, Oregon, and saying hello to him.
Ah, well, the club is actually in Washington, just over the river.
Okay.